Gotcha.
The wrench slipped from Jake Morrison's oil-stained fingers as he heard his wife Emma's voice drift through the thin garage walls. She was laughing. That particular laugh she reserved for when she thought she was being clever. The laugh that used to make his chest warm but now sent ice through his veins. "He actually thinks I'm at book club," Emma's voice carried clearly through the evening air. "God, Trent, you should see how pathetic he looks when he tries to touch me, like a kicked dog begging for scraps." Jake's hand froze on the carburetor he'd been rebuilding. His 1969 Charger sat before him, half restored, much like everything else in his life. Incomplete, waiting for better times that never seemed to come. Does he know? The second voice belonged to Trent Walker, Jake's best friend since childhood. The man who'd stood beside him at his wedding 3 years ago. The man who'd borrowed money from Jake just last month. Know what? That his wife is getting what she needs from a real man? Jake's too busy with his grease monkey fantasies to notice anything. The laughter that followed hit Jake like a physical blow. He stood motionless in the dim garage, surrounded by the familiar scent of motor oil and old leather, while his world crumbled around him. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But Emma's next words shattered any remaining doubt. "I'm filing for divorce next week. My lawyer says I can get half of everything, including that stupid garage he's so proud of. Then, maybe I can finally live like I deserve instead of being married to some small-town nobody." Jake's vision blurred. The socket wrench in his hand suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. Outside, a car door slammed, followed by the sound of Trent's Silverado pulling away. Emma's heels clicked across the driveway, each step driving deeper into Jake's chest. He'd been working 16-hour days at Brennan's Auto Works for the past 2 years, saving every penny to buy Emma the house she wanted. The house with the white picket fence and the kitchen island she'd circled in magazines. He'd skipped meals, worn the same work boots until the soles had holes, all so she could have the life she dreamed about. And she thought he was pathetic. The side door opened, and Emma appeared in the garage doorway. She looked exactly as she had that morning when she'd kissed his cheek and told him she loved him. Shoulder-length auburn hair, perfectly styled, makeup flawless despite the late hour. She wore the blue dress he'd bought her for their anniversary. "Hey, babe," she said, her voice honey-sweet. "Book club ran late. How's the car coming?" Jake stared at her, studying the face he'd once thought he'd die for. Had she always been this good at lying? Had he always been this blind? "It's fine," he managed, his voice rough. "Good book tonight." Emma's smile never wavered. "Oh, you know how it is. Same drama, different week." She wasn't wrong about that. "I'm heading up to shower," she continued. "Don't stay up too late, okay? You work too hard." Jake nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Emma disappeared into the house, leaving him alone with the weight of what he'd heard. He walked slowly around his Charger, running his hand along the primer gray fender. This car had been his father's before lung cancer took him 2 years ago. Jake had planned to finish the restoration as a surprise for Emma, their first real family heirloom. Now it felt like the only honest thing left in his life. The next morning arrived gray and cold, matching Jake's mood perfectly. He moved through his routine mechanically: coffee, shower, work clothes. Emma bustled around the kitchen, chattering about her day while buttering toast she wouldn't eat. "Don't forget we're having dinner with Trent and Sarah this Friday," she said without looking up. "I already made reservations at Giuseppe's." The casual mention of Trent's name hit Jake like a sucker punch. Sarah was Trent's wife of 5 years, a sweet woman who taught second grade and had no idea her husband was screwing her friend. "Looking forward to it," Jake lied. Emma glanced at him then, and for a moment something flickered across her face. Guilt? Fear? But it was gone so quickly, Jake wondered if he'd imagined it. At work, Jake threw himself into an engine rebuild with savage focus. Brennan's Auto Works occupied a converted warehouse on the edge of town, all concrete floors and harsh fluorescent lights. It smelled like cigarettes and WD-40, and the radio played the same classic rock stations it had for the past decade. "You're going to strip those bolts if you keep cranking on them like that," said Danny Phelps, the shop's other full-time mechanic. Danny was pushing 60, had arms like tree trunks, and could diagnose engine trouble by sound alone. Jake realized he'd been over-tightening a valve cover bolt with unnecessary force. He loosened his grip, tried to find his rhythm again. "Everything okay, Jake? You seem off today." "Just tired," Jake muttered. Danny studied him with the sharp eyes of someone who'd been reading people longer than Jake had been alive. "Tired's one thing. You look like someone ran over your dog." The comparison stung more than Danny could know. Jake and Emma didn't have kids. Emma said she wasn't ready, but they'd adopted a German Shepherd mix named Bear from the shelter last year. The dog had become Jake's shadow, following him to the garage every evening. "I'm fine, Danny, really." Danny didn't look convinced, but he let it drop. The older man had been through his own rough patch when his wife left him 10 years ago. Maybe he recognized the signs. The day dragged on with painful slowness. Jake rebuilt a transmission, changed oil in 3 different vehicles, and diagnosed a timing chain problem on a Honda Civic. Normal work that should have been satisfying but felt hollow now. During his lunch break, he sat in his truck in the parking lot staring at his phone. He'd pulled up Trent's number 6 times, wanting to call and confront him. But what would he say? And what if Trent denied it? What if Emma convinced everyone that Jake was losing his mind? Instead, he found himself scrolling through old photos. Emma at their wedding, radiant in white lace. Emma laughing at last year's 4th of July barbecue. Emma curled up on the couch with Bear, reading a book on a Sunday morning. When had it all started feeling like a performance? That evening, Jake arrived home to find Emma's car missing from the driveway. A note on the kitchen counter explained she was having drinks with coworkers and would be home late. The note was written in Emma's careful handwriting, but Jake read it differently now. Every word felt calculated, designed to provide cover for lies. Bear greeted him at the door with typical enthusiasm, tail wagging and tongue lolling. At least someone was happy to see him. Jake fed the dog, then wandered out to the garage. The Charger sat waiting, patient as always. He'd been working on this restoration for 18 months, learning as he went through YouTube videos and old Chilton manuals. It wasn't pretty yet, but the engine was solid. The 440 big block had been completely rebuilt, every component carefully restored or replaced. Like him, the car just needed the right moment to roar back to life. Jake popped the hood and lost himself in the familiar ritual of checking connections, adjusting the carburetor, testing electrical systems. Working with his hands had always been his meditation, the one place where problems had solutions and effort led to results. Hours passed. Emma still wasn't home. Around midnight, Jake heard a car in the driveway. Through the garage window, he watched Emma climb out of Trent's Silverado. They stood talking by the truck for several minutes, their voices too low to make out words. Then Trent leaned down and kissed her. Not a friendly peck, but the kind of kiss that left no doubt about their relationship. Jake's hands clenched into fists. Every muscle in his body screamed for action, for confrontation, for violence. He could storm out there right now, drag Trent out of that truck and knock him bloody in the driveway. But something held him back. Maybe it was the memory of his father's voice. "Son, anger's like fire. Use it to forge something useful, or it'll just burn everything down." Jake stayed in the shadows and watched his wife kiss his best friend goodnight. He memorized every detail, the way Emma's hand rested on Trent's chest, the way she smiled up at him, the casual intimacy that spoke of familiarity, of routine. When Emma finally came inside, Jake was waiting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and yesterday's newspaper spread on the table. "Hey," she said, slightly breathless. "You're up late." "Couldn't sleep." "How were drinks?" Emma kicked off her heels and rubbed her feet. "You know how it is with the girls from work? One drink turns into 5, and suddenly it's past midnight." She was good. Very good. If Jake hadn't seen her with Trent, he might have believed the tired smile, the casual explanation. "Did you drive home okay? You seem a little unsteady." Emma's eyes sharpened slightly. "I'm fine, just tired. Good thing Trent was there to make sure you got home safe." The words hung in the air between them. Emma's face went very still. "What do you mean?" Jake took a sip of his coffee, meeting her gaze steadily. "I saw his truck in the driveway. Nice of him to follow you home." For a moment, Emma looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then her expression smoothed over and she laughed. "Oh, that? Yeah, he was leaving the same bar and offered to follow me home. You know how paranoid he gets about women driving alone at night?" Another lie, delivered with perfect sincerity. Jake nodded slowly. "That's Trent, always looking out for people." "Exactly." Emma yawned and stretched. "I'm exhausted. Coming to bed?" "In a few minutes. Want to finish this article?" Emma kissed the top of his head, the same casual gesture she'd made every night for 3 years. "Don't stay up too late, okay? You work too hard." The same words she'd used the night before. Jake wondered how many times she'd used them to cover her lies. After Emma went upstairs, Jake sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. Bear padded over and rested his head on Jake's knee, sensing his distress. Jake scratched behind the dog's ears, grateful for the simple, honest affection. "At least you're loyal, boy," he whispered. The next few days passed in a haze of normalcy that felt surreal. Emma continued her routine: work, mysterious evening commitments, late nights with friends. Jake went through the motions of being a husband while cataloging every lie, every inconsistency. He started paying closer attention to small details: the way Emma checked her phone constantly, always angling the screen away from him; the new lingerie that appeared in her drawer; the fact that she'd started working out more, buying expensive makeup, getting her nails done every week. She was preparing for something. Or someone. On Thursday evening, Jake came home to find Emma packing a small overnight bag. "What's this?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Girls' weekend in the city," Emma replied without looking up. "I told you about it last week, remember? Sharon's bachelorette party." Jake didn't remember any such conversation, but he nodded anyway. "When will you be back?" "Sunday evening. Late, probably." Emma zipped the bag and finally looked at him. "You'll be okay on your own? I'll manage." Emma stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. "Love you." The words felt like acid on his skin. After Emma left, Jake paced the house like a caged animal. Every rational part of his brain told him to confront her, to demand the truth, to stop living this lie. But a deeper instinct warned him to wait, to watch, to understand the full scope of what he was dealing with. He called his cousin Mason, a former Army Ranger who ran a salvage yard on the outskirts of town. Mason was 5 years older than Jake, weathered by 2 tours in Middle East, and a messy divorce that had left him bitter about marriage in general. "Jake, everything okay? You sound like hell. Can I come over? I need to talk to someone." "Course, bring beer." Mason's salvage yard occupied 20 acres of rolling hills dotted with the corpses of dead vehicles: cars, trucks, boats, motorcycles, all arranged in rough rows that formed a metal graveyard. Mason's house was a converted Airstream trailer surrounded by German shepherds and security cameras. The 2 men sat on Mason's porch, drinking Budweiser and watching the sun set over the scrap metal. Jake told his cousin everything: the overheard conversation, the lies, the growing certainty that his marriage was a sham. Mason listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or taking a pull from his beer. When Jake finished, they sat in silence for several minutes. "You sure about this?" Mason finally asked. "I saw them together. I heard what she said." "And you want to what? Confront them? File for divorce? Knock the crap out of Trent?" Jake stared out at the salvage yard, thinking about all those broken machines waiting for someone to strip them for parts. "I don't know. I can't pretend anymore." Mason studied his younger cousin with eyes that had seen too much. "You remember when we were kids? And that bully, what was his name? Kevin Martinez, used to pick on you at school." "Yeah. And you remember what I told you?" Jake nodded slowly. "Don't get mad. Get even. Kevin was bigger than you, stronger, had more friends, but you were smarter. You figured out he was cheating on his girlfriend with his girlfriend's sister. One anonymous note later, and Kevin's whole world imploded. He never bothered you again." "This is different, Mason. This is my wife." "No," Mason said quietly. "This is your enemy. She just happens to be wearing your wife's face." The words hit Jake like a physical blow, but they also carried the ring of truth. "What are you saying?" Mason finished his beer and crushed the can in his fist. "I'm saying maybe it's time to stop playing defense." That weekend, while Emma was supposedly at a bachelorette party, Jake drove past Trent's house. Trent's Silverado wasn't in the driveway, but Emma's Honda was parked around the corner. Jake sat in his truck for 20 minutes, part of him hoping he was wrong, that there was some innocent explanation. But at 10:47 p.m., he watched through Trent's living room window as his wife walked past wearing nothing but a towel. The last piece of Jake's heart crumbled to dust. He drove home in a fog of rage and grief, Bear greeting him at the door with tail-wagging enthusiasm. Jake sank to his knees and buried his face in the dog's fur, fighting back tears that felt like admitting defeat. "What do I do, boy? What the hell do I do?" Bear licked his face and whined softly, sensing his pain. Jake spent the rest of the weekend in his garage, working on the Charger with manic intensity. He installed new brake pads, replaced the exhaust system, tuned the carburetor until the engine purred like a satisfied cat. Physical work was the only thing that kept him from thinking about Emma and Trent together. By Sunday evening, the car was mechanically perfect. It just needed paint and interior work to complete the transformation. Emma came home around 9, looking relaxed and satisfied. She carried herself differently, more confident, more alive, the way she used to look when they were first dating. "How was your weekend?" Jake asked, not bothering to look up from the newspaper. "Great. Really needed that time with the girls." Emma dropped into the chair across from him. "How about you? What did you do?" "Worked on the car mostly, made some good progress." "That's nice." Emma's attention was already drifting to her phone. "I'm exhausted. Going to bed early." She kissed his forehead and headed upstairs. Jake heard the shower running, then the bedroom door closing. He sat in the kitchen until past midnight, staring at nothing, feeling hollow. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. "Jake, it's Tom Brennan." His boss's voice was tight with stress. "I need you to come in early. We've got a situation." Jake arrived at the shop to find Tom pacing beside a disassembled engine block, his face red with anger. "That son of a witch Trent Walker sold me a rebuilt engine that's got more problems than a crack house," Tom exploded. "Timing chains stretched, pistons are scored, and the block's got a hairline crack that'll need machine work. Customers threatening to sue." Jake's blood turned to ice. "Trent sold you an engine?" "Yeah, said he had connections with a rebuilder in Detroit, offered me a hell of a deal." Tom kicked at the engine block. $2,300 down the drain, plus whatever it costs to make this right with the customer." Jake stared at the destroyed engine, pieces clicking together in his mind. Emma had been pushing him to co-sign for a boat loan Trent wanted. She'd said Trent was starting a side business, that he needed capital to get established. "Tom, did Trent ask for payment up front?" "Of course he did. Said the rebuilder needed cash to start work." Tom's face darkened further. "You think he screwed me on purpose?" Jake didn't answer directly, but he made a mental note to check their joint savings account when he got home. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine work, but Jake's mind was elsewhere. When he got home, he went straight to his computer and logged into their online banking. Their savings account, the money he'd been accumulating for Emma's dream house, showed a balance of $347. It had contained over $12,000 last month. Jake stared at the screen, his vision going red around the edges. He pulled up the transaction history and found 3 withdrawals, each one signed by Emma. The memo lines read, "Home improvement supplies." They hadn't done any home improvements. Jake printed out the bank statements and sat at the kitchen table, studying the evidence of his wife's betrayal. The pattern was clear: regular withdrawals over the past 6 months, always when Jake was working late or out of town for training seminars. Emma had been systematically draining their savings to fund her affair with Trent. When Emma came home from work, she found Jake waiting at the kitchen table with the bank statements spread in front of him. "Hey, babe," she said, dropping her purse by the door. "What's all this?" "You tell me," Jake replied quietly. Emma approached the table slowly, her expression shifting from casual curiosity to guarded caution as she recognized the bank statements. "I can explain." "Can you?" Jake's voice was eerily calm. "Because I'm looking at $12,000 in withdrawals, Emma. $12,000 we saved for our house, and I'm trying to figure out what home improvements we made that cost that much money." Emma's face went pale. She sank into the chair across from him, her hands trembling slightly. "Jake, listen." "I am listening. I've been listening to a lot of things lately." Jake leaned back in his chair, studying his wife's face. "Like how Tom Brennan got screwed on an engine deal by Trent Walker, an engine that cost about the same as our missing savings." Emma's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "You don't understand. I understand perfectly." Jake's voice remained level, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "You've been screwing my best friend and using our money to finance it." The words hung in the air between them like a curse. Emma's composure finally cracked. "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think." Jake stood up slowly. "I heard you, Emma, 2 weeks ago in the garage, laughing about how pathetic I am, planning to divorce me and take half of everything." Emma's face crumpled. "Jake, please." "Please what? Please pretend I didn't hear you call me a small-town nobody? Please ignore the fact that you've been stealing from me to pay for your boyfriend's scams?" Tears started flowing down Emma's cheeks, but Jake felt nothing. The man who would have comforted his crying wife was gone, replaced by someone harder. "Where is he, Emma? Where's Trent?" "I don't know what you mean." Jake slammed his hand on the table, making Emma jump. Don't lie to me anymore. Where is he? At the gym, Emma whispered. Iron Paradise. He goes there every night after work. Jake nodded and walked toward the door. Where are you going? Emma's voice was high with panic. To have a conversation. Jake, don't do anything stupid, please. Jake paused at the door and looked back at his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife. She looked small and frightened, nothing like the confident woman who'd been mocking him 2 weeks ago. Stupid would have been letting this continue, he said quietly. What I'm about to do is just overdue. Iron Paradise occupied a converted industrial building downtown, all exposed brick and harsh lighting. The gym catered to serious lifters, guys who competed in powerlifting meets and strongman competitions. Trent had been coming here for the past year, transforming his dad bod into something he thought made him irresistible. Jake found him at the bench press, working through a set with more weight than he should have been attempting alone. Trent was red-faced and straining, his form sloppy with fatigue. Need a spot? Jake asked conversationally. Trent looked up, surprise flickering across his face. Jake, what are you doing here? Thought we should talk. Jake moved to the head of the bench and placed his hands on the barbell, ostensibly to spot Trent's lift. About Emma. Trent's arms trembled under the weight. What about Emma? Jake applied just enough pressure to the bar to make it heavier, watching Trent struggle. Oh, I think you know. Trent managed to rack the weight, breathing hard. He sat up on the bench, sweat pouring down his face. I don't know what you're talking about, man. Jake squatted down so he was at eye level with his former best friend. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I saw you kiss her, Trent. I know about the hotel rooms. I know about my money funding your little engine scam. Jake's eyes were completely flat, emotionless. I know everything. Trent's face went white. He tried to stand, but Jake placed a hand on his shoulder and pushed him back down. We're not done talking. Jake, listen. No, you listen. Jake's grip tightened on Trent's shoulder. You're going to pay Tom Brennan back every penny you stole from him. You're going to return what's left of my money. And then you're going to disappear. I can't what? I can't prove that you defrauded a local business owner? I can't show everyone the photos I have of you and Emma together? I can't make your life a living hell in a town where everyone knows your name? Trent was shaking now, either from fear or rage. You think you're tough? You think you can threaten me? Jake smiled then, and it was worse than any expression of anger. I don't think anything, Trent. I know exactly what I can do. The question is whether you're smart enough to make this easy on yourself. Other gym members were starting to notice the confrontation. Jake could feel their attention, but he didn't care. Let them watch. You have 48 hours, Jake continued quietly. After that, things get complicated. He stood up and walked away, leaving Trent sitting on the bench, staring after him with a mixture of fear and fury. The drive home gave Jake time to think. Confronting Trent had felt good, better than he'd expected. But it was just the beginning. Emma was the real problem, and she wouldn't be dealt with as easily. He found her waiting in the living room, bare lying at her feet. She'd been crying, her makeup smeared and her hair disheveled. She looked up when he entered, her eyes red and desperate. Is he okay? She asked. Jake almost laughed. Even now, her first concern was for Trent. He's fine, for now. Emma stood up slowly. Jake, we need to talk about this, like adults. Adults don't steal from their spouses to finance affairs. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. How was it supposed to happen, Emma? Were you planning to ask my permission first? Emma wrapped her arms around herself, looking lost. I was unhappy. We've been growing apart for months. So, instead of talking to me about it, you decided to screw my best friend and clean out our savings account. Emma flinched at his language. Jake had never talked to her this way before. I want a divorce, she said quietly. I figured that out already. Jake sat down heavily in his recliner. Question is, what else do you want? What do you mean? I mean, how much of my life are you planning to destroy on your way out? Emma's expression hardened slightly. I'm entitled to half of everything, Jake. The house, the savings, the garage. What savings? You already spent it. There are other assets. Assets? Jake's voice rose. You mean the house I've been eliminating myself to pay for? The garage where I work 16 hours a day to support us? My father's car that I'm restoring? Community property laws don't. Jake's voice cut through her words like a blade. Don't stand there and quote legal terms at me like some stranger. You want to take half of everything I've worked for so you can start fresh with the man who's been screwing us both? Fine. But don't pretend it's about legal entitlements. Emma's face flushed with anger. You think this is all my fault? You think you're some innocent sufferer? I think I'm the guy who's been working his A off to give his wife the life she wanted, while she was busy planning to leave him. Maybe if you paid more attention to me instead of that stupid car was going to be your anniversary present. Jake's voice dropped to a whisper. 3 years of work, Emma. Every evening after work, every weekend. I was rebuilding it for you. The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She stared at him, speechless. But you already knew that, didn't you? That's why it was so funny when you were laughing with Trent about my grease monkey fantasies. Emma started crying again, but Jake felt nothing. The man who would have comforted her was gone. I'm sleeping in the garage tonight, Jake said, standing up. Tomorrow you can start looking for somewhere else to live. Jake, please! But he was already walking away, Bear padding along beside him. The garage felt like a sanctuary. Jake had spent so many hours here that it felt more like home than the house. He pulled a camping cot from the storage area and set it up beside the Charger, then sat on the edge and stared at his father's car. Richard Morrison had bought this Charger new in 1969, the year he married Jake's mother. He'd driven it to work at the steel mill every day until Jake was born, then relegated it to weekend drives and summer car shows. When the mill closed and money got tight, Richard had parked the car in the garage and promised himself he'd get back to it someday. Someday never came. Cancer took Richard 2 years ago, leaving Jake with a house, a garage, and a half-finished dream. Jake had planned to complete the restoration and give it to Emma as a symbol of their future together. Now it felt like the only honest thing left in his life. Bear settled down on an old blanket beside the cot, sensing that this was home now. Jake reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears. Just you and me now, boy. The next morning, Jake woke to the sound of Emma moving around the house. He could hear her on the phone, her voice high and agitated, probably calling Trent, or her sister, or a lawyer. It didn't matter. Jake showered at the gym, then went to work. Danny took one look at him and raised an eyebrow. Rough night? You could say that. Want to talk about it? Jake considered the offer. Danny had been through his own divorce, might have useful advice. But Jake wasn't ready to talk yet. He was still processing, still figuring out what came next. Maybe later. Danny nodded and left him alone. Jake threw himself into work with savage intensity, rebuilding a transmission with the kind of focus that left no room for thought. Around noon, his phone buzzed with a text from Emma. We need to discuss practical matters. When will you be home? Jake typed back. I live in the garage now. You can discuss whatever you want with your lawyer. Emma's response came immediately. Don't be childish. We're adults. Adults don't screw their spouse's best friend, Jake replied, then turned off his phone. The afternoon passed slowly. Jake kept expecting Trent to show up, to try to explain or justify or threaten, but Trent was apparently smart enough to stay away. Around 5 o'clock, Tom Brennan appeared in the doorway of Jake's work bay, holding an envelope. Got something for you, Tom said, his expression grim. Jake wiped his hands on a shop rag and took the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $2,300 and a handwritten note. Sorry for the trouble, T.W. Trent Walker brought this by about an hour ago, Tom explained. Looked like he'd seen a ghost, wouldn't meet my eyes, just handed over the money and left. Jake nodded slowly. So Trent had taken his warning seriously. Jake, I don't know what you said to him, but I appreciate it. That money means I can make things right with my customer. Good. Jake folded the check and put it in his wallet. Trent won't be a problem anymore. Tom studied his employee's face, reading things there that worried him. Jake, whatever's going on between you two, it's handled, Tom. Don't worry about it. But Tom continued to look concerned as he walked away. That evening, Jake stopped by Mason's salvage yard again. His cousin was working on a motorcycle engine, cigarette dangling from his lips, hands black with grease. You look like hell, Mason observed without looking up. Feel worse. Jake pulled up a metal stool and sat down. I confronted them both. How'd that go? Trent paid back the money he stole. Emma wants a divorce. Mason nodded slowly. Expected that. What's next? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Jake stared out at the salvage yard, all those broken machines waiting for someone to strip them for parts. I keep thinking about what you said. about not getting mad, getting even. And I'm having trouble seeing the difference. Mason set down his wrench and really looked at his cousin for the first time. Jake's face was drawn and hollow, his eyes flat and distant. He looked like a man who'd lost something essential. Jake, when I said that about getting even, I meant outthinking your enemy, being smarter, not meaner. I know what you meant. Do you? Because you're starting to scare me a little. Jake met his cousin's eyes. They destroyed my life, Mason. They stole my money, my marriage, my best friend. They made me into a joke. And you want me to what? Turn the other cheek? Forgive and forget? I want you to be smart about this, Mason said quietly. Revenge is like engine oil. A little goes a long way, but too much will ruin everything. Jake stood up and walked to the edge of the yard, looking out over the rows of dead vehicles. Maybe everything's already ruined? Mason joined him, lighting a fresh cigarette. Your dad ever tell you about the time he caught someone stealing tools from his garage? Jake shook his head. This was before you were born. Some dope fiend broke in and made off with about $500 worth of tools. Your dad tracked him down, got his tools back, but he didn't call the cops. Why not? Said the guy was already destroying himself with pills. Didn't need help from the law. Mason took a long drag. Point is, sometimes the best revenge is just stepping back and letting people face the consequences of their own choices. Emma's not a dope fiend, Mason. She's a calculating witch who played me for a fool. Mason winced at the venom in his cousin's voice. Jake! No, I'm done being the nice guy. I'm done being understanding. They want to destroy my life? Fine, but they're going to pay for it. Mason watched Jake walk back to his truck, worry etched deep in his weathered face. He'd seen that look before in Middle East, in men who'd been pushed past their breaking point. It never ended well. Jake drove home to find Emma's car gone and a note on the kitchen table. Staying at my sister's for a few days. We'll talk when you're ready to be reasonable. The house felt enormous and empty without her presence. Jake walked through the rooms, seeing everything differently now. The framed photos of their wedding looked like evidence of a crime. The furniture they'd picked out together felt like props in an elaborate lie. He gathered up all the pictures of Emma and put them in a cardboard box, along with her books, her coffee mugs, the little decorative items she'd scattered throughout the house. By the time he was finished, the place looked like a bachelor pad again. Better. That night, Jake sat in his garage with a beer and his laptop, researching divorce law in Ohio. The reading was depressing but educational. Emma was right about community property. She could claim half of almost everything they owned together, the house, the garage, even his tools and equipment. But Jake had been thinking about that conversation with Mason, about being smarter instead of meaner. Emma wanted to play legal games? Fine. But she was about to learn that Jake knew how to read the rules too. The next morning, Jake called in sick to work and drove to Columbus to meet with a lawyer. Margaret Chen was a family law attorney with 20 years of experience and a reputation for being thorough. Her office was all dark wood and law books, designed to intimidate. Mr. Morrison, she said, reviewing the notes she'd taken during their phone conversation. You mentioned that your wife has been systematically withdrawing money from your joint accounts without your knowledge or consent. That's right. Jake handed over the bank statements he'd printed. $12,000 over 6 months. Margaret studied the documents, her expression thoughtful. And you can prove these withdrawals were used to fund her extramarital affair? I have photos of her with the other man, text messages, hotel receipts I found in her purse. Good. Ohio is a no-fault divorce state, but financial misconduct during marriage can still influence property division. Margaret set down the papers. What's your goal here, Mr. Morrison? I want to protect what's mine. The house, the garage, my father's car. Tell me about the car. Jake explained the Charger's history, how it had been his father's before it became his project. Margaret took careful notes. Gifts and inheritances are generally considered separate property, not subject to division. If you can document that the vehicle was inherited from your father, it should remain yours. What about the house? That's more complicated. How long have you been married? 3 years. And the house was purchased during the marriage? Yes, but with money I'd saved before we got married, plus my father's life insurance payout. Margaret's expression brightened. Do you have documentation of those premarital savings? Jake nodded. He'd been meticulous about record keeping, a habit inherited from his accountant father. Then, we might be able to argue that the house should be considered separate property as well, or at least that your wife's interest should be reduced to reflect her actual contributions. They talked for another hour, mapping out strategy. Margaret explained that Ohio allowed for unequal distribution of marital assets when one spouse had committed financial misconduct. Emma's affair, combined with her theft of their savings, could significantly impact the final settlement. One more thing, Margaret said as Jake prepared to leave. Your wife mentioned she's planning to file for divorce. It's better if we file first. Gives us some strategic advantages. Jake shook her hand. Do it. That afternoon, Jake felt lighter than he had in weeks. Emma wanted to play hardball. She was about to discover that she'd been playing t-ball while he'd moved up to the majors. He stopped by the bank and moved his remaining money into a new account that only he could access. Then he drove to the DMV and transferred the Chargers title into his name alone, using his father's death certificate to establish inheritance. By evening, he'd locked down everything he could think of. When Emma tried to clean him out, she'd find the cupboard bare. Jake was working under the Charger's hood when he heard a car in the driveway. Through the garage window, he saw Emma climbing out of her Honda, her face set with determination. She'd traded her usual business attire for jeans and a sweater, trying to look approachable. She knocked on the garage doorframe before entering, a courtesy that would have been laughable if it weren't so sad. Jake, can we talk? He didn't look up from the engine. Thought you were staying at your sister's. I came to get some things, and to see if we can work this out like adults. Jake straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a shop rag. Emma looked smaller somehow, less confident than usual. The lighting in the garage was harsh and unforgiving, highlighting the lines around her eyes the way her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Work what out exactly? Our marriage, this situation. Jake almost laughed. Situation, is that what we're calling it now? Emma took a step closer, her voice taking on the pleading tone she used when she wanted something. Jake, I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you, but we can get past this if we both try. Can we? Jake leaned against the Charger's fender, studying his wife's face. Can we get past you screwing Trent? Can we get past you stealing our money? Can we get past you calling me pathetic behind my back? Emma flinched at each accusation. I never meant for you to hear that. So you meant to keep lying to me indefinitely? No, I was confused, scared. I didn't know how to talk to you about how unhappy I was. Jake nodded slowly. So instead of talking, you decided to have an affair and plan to take half of everything I own. I was angry. You were greedy. Jake's voice remained calm, conversational. You saw a chance to trade up from a blue-collar husband to whatever fantasy Trent was selling you. Emma's composure cracked. That's not fair. Fair? Jake stepped away from the car, moving closer to Emma. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been you asking for a divorce before you started screwing around. Fair would have been splitting our savings legally instead of stealing it. Fair would have been treating me like a human being instead of an obstacle to your happiness. Emma started crying again, but Jake felt nothing. The tears that once would have made him rush to comfort her now looked like manipulation. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Jake. I know I screwed up, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through our problems. Our problems? Jake's voice rose slightly. We don't have problems, Emma. You have problems. You're a liar and a thief and a cheat, and no amount of counseling is going to change that. Emma recoiled as if he'd slapped her. You don't mean that. I mean every word. Jake pulled a folded document from his back pocket. These are divorce papers. You're being served. Emma stared at the papers like they were a poisonous snake. You filed for divorce? This morning. My lawyer says we can do this easy or hard. Your choice. Your lawyer? Emma's voice cracked. Jake, we can't afford lawyers. We should try mediation, work something out ourselves. Jake almost smiled. Emma was already thinking about money, about how to minimize her losses. She still didn't understand that the game had changed. I can afford a lawyer. Question is whether you can. Emma sank onto a nearby workbench, the papers trembling in her hands. What do you want? I want my life back. The house stays with me. The garage stays with me. The Charger stays with me. You get whatever you brought into this marriage, plus half of any legitimate marital assets we acquired together. Half of everything is mine legally. Half of everything we earned together. Not half of what you stole. Jake pulled out another document. This is a forensic accounting of our finances for the past year. Every withdrawal, every unexplained expense, every dollar you spent on your affair with Trent. Emma's face went white as she scanned the pages. Jake's lawyer had been thorough: hotel receipts, restaurant charges, even the gas Emma had used driving to meet Trent. You can try to fight this in court, Jake continued, but my lawyer thinks a judge will be very interested in how you've been spending marital assets on extramarital activities. Emma looked up at him with something approaching fear. You're trying to ruin me. I'm trying to protect myself. There's a difference. What about Trent? Are you going after him too? Jake's expression darkened. Trent's handling his own consequences. Emma stood up slowly, clutching the papers to her chest. I never wanted it to end like this. You never wanted to get caught. That's different. Emma walked to the garage door, then turned back. The man I married would never have been this cruel. Jake met her eyes steadily. The man you married died the night I heard you laughing about how pathetic he was. What you're dealing with now is what's left. Emma drove away without another word, leaving Jake alone in the garage with Bear and the familiar scent of motor oil. He felt hollow but clean, like an infected wound that had finally been drained. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings and paperwork. Emma had hired her own lawyer, a young guy fresh out of law school who was clearly in over his head. Jake's forensic accountant had done devastating work, documenting every penny Emma had misappropriated. The evidence was overwhelming. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, gifts purchased for Trent, all paid for with money from their joint accounts. Emma's lawyer tried to argue that married couples had equal access to marital funds, but Jake's lawyer countered that using those funds to support an extramarital affair constituted financial misconduct. Meanwhile, Jake threw himself into finishing the Charger. He worked every evening and all weekend, sanding body panels, priming metal, wet sanding primer until the surface was glass smooth. The repetitive work was meditative, each step bringing the car closer to completion. He'd chosen a deep metallic blue for the paint, the same color his father had originally selected in 1969. 3 coats of base, 4 coats of clear, each one applied with painstaking precision. When the final coat dried, the Charger looked like it had rolled off the showroom floor. The interior came next: new seat covers, door panels, carpet. Jake had saved the original gauge cluster and steering wheel, rebuilding them with modern electronics hidden behind vintage faces. The radio looked like the original AM unit, but contained a modern stereo system with Bluetooth connectivity. By the time he installed the final piece, a set of chrome rally wheels wrapped in modern performance tires, the Charger was a perfect fusion of classic style and contemporary technology. It was exactly what his father had envisioned when he'd started the project 40 years ago. Jake stood back and admired his work. The car was beautiful, but more than that, it was honest. Every component had been carefully chosen, every system properly rebuilt. It was the opposite of everything his marriage had become. On a cold Thursday evening in November, Jake fired up the Charger for the first time since the restoration was complete. The 440 big block roared to life with a deep, throaty rumble that echoed off the garage walls. Bear barked excitedly, tail wagging as the sound filled the space. Jake let the engine warm up, listening to the perfect harmony of 8 cylinders working in unison. Everything was tuned precisely: timing, fuel mixture, ignition curves. The engine ran like a Swiss watch, smooth and powerful. He was so absorbed in the sound that he almost missed the knock on the garage door. Trent Walker stood in the doorway, looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in the past month. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled. Dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights. Jake, he said, having to raise his voice over the engine noise, we need to talk. Jake shut off the engine, and the sudden silence felt oppressive. He climbed out of the car slowly, keeping his distance from his former friend. Thought I told you to disappear. I tried, but everywhere I go in this town, people know what I did. Tom Brennan's been telling everyone about the engine scam. My boss fired me. Sarah left me. Jake felt a flicker of sympathy for Sarah, who'd been an innocent sufferer in all this, but he felt nothing for Trent. That's what happens when you screw people over. This isn't just about me anymore, Jake. It's about Emma, too. Jake's expression hardened. What about Emma? She's falling apart, lost her job, can't afford her lawyer anymore. She's been staying in some fleabag motel because her sister won't take her calls. And you want me to feel sorry for her? Trent stepped into the garage, desperation clear in his voice. I want you to stop destroying her life. Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just refusing to be destroyed. You're being vindictive. I'm being thorough. Jake moved closer to Trent, and the bigger man actually backed up a step. You and Emma made choices. Now you get to live with the consequences. She loves you, Jake. She made a mistake, but she loves you. She loves what I could provide her. There's a difference. Trent's face flushed with anger. You're not the same man I grew up with. No, I'm not. That man was weak. He let people take advantage of him, steal from him, mock him behind his back. Jake's voice dropped to a whisper. That man is dead. Trent stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. Emma was right about one thing. You are pathetic. The words hung in the air between them. Jake felt something cold and dark unfurl in his chest. Get out, he said quietly. What? Get out of my garage. Get out of my town. Get out of my life. Trent's hands clenched into fists. You can't make me. Can I? Jake stepped closer, and Trent suddenly realized how much his former friend had changed. Jake had always been lean, but now he looked hard, dangerous. You think because you work out at that gym, you're tough? Jake's voice was conversational, almost friendly. You think lifting weights makes you a fighter? Trent raised his fists, trying to look threatening. You want to find out? Jake smiled then, and it was terrifying. I spent the last month learning things about myself. Want to know what I discovered? Before Trent could respond, Jake moved. Not the wild swing of an angry amateur, but the precise, economical motion of someone who'd been thinking about this moment for weeks. His first punch caught Trent in the solar plexus, doubling him over. The second was an uppercut that snapped Trent's head back and sent him staggering into a tool cabinet. Trent tried to swing back, but his movements were clumsy and telegraphed. Jake slipped the punch easily and drove his fist into Trent's ribs, hearing something crack. Stop! Trent gasped. But Jake was beyond hearing. This was for every lie, every stolen dollar, every night he'd lain awake wondering what he'd done wrong. Jake grabbed Trent by the shirt and slammed him against the garage wall. Tools rattled on their hooks from the impact. You called me pathetic, Jake said, his voice eerily calm despite the violence. But who's pathetic now? Who's begging? Trent's lip was split and bleeding, his left eye already swelling shut. Please, he whispered. Jake held him against the wall for a moment longer, then released him. Trent slumped to the floor, gasping for breath. You have 24 hours to leave town, Jake said, walking back to the charger. If I see you after that, we'll finish this conversation. Trent struggled to his feet, one hand pressed to his ribs. You're crazy. I'm focused. Jake opened the car door and climbed in. There's a difference. Trent limped toward the garage door, then turned back. This won't bring her back, you know. Emma's never coming back. Jake started the engine, the rumble drowning out Trent's words. Good, he said to himself. I don't want her back. Trent disappeared into the night, and Jake was alone again with his car and his dog, and the satisfaction of a job well done. The divorce was finalized 3 days before Christmas. Emma got her car, her clothes, and $37,000, exactly half of what they'd legitimately earned together during their marriage. The house, the garage, and the charger remained with Jake, along with most of their tools and equipment. Emma's lawyer had tried to argue for more, but the forensic accountant's evidence was overwhelming. The judge was particularly unimpressed with Emma's use of marital funds to support her extramarital affair. Jake sat in the courthouse hallway afterward, watching Emma sign the final papers. She looked broken, nothing like the confident woman who'd mocked him in his own garage months ago. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair unwashed. She'd been living in a cheap apartment on the wrong side of town, working at a diner to pay her bills. When she finished signing, she walked over to where Jake sat. Satisfied? She asked, her voice hollow. Jake looked up at her, feeling nothing. It's not about satisfaction. It's about justice. Justice. You destroyed my life. You destroyed your life. I just refuse to let you destroy mine, too. Emma's composure finally cracked. I loved you, Jake. I really did. No, Jake said quietly. You loved what I represented. Security, stability, someone who'd work himself to passing to give you the life you thought you deserved. Emma started to cry again, but Jake felt nothing. The man who would have comforted her was gone, replaced by someone harder. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry for everything. Jake stood up and walked away without another word. There was nothing left to say. That evening, Jake sat in his garage with a beer, admiring the finished Charger. The car was perfect. Every system rebuilt, every surface restored. It was exactly what his father had envisioned when he'd started the project 40 years ago. Bear lay on his blanket nearby, content to watch Jake work on small projects. The dog had been his constant companion through the worst months of his life, never judging, never asking for more than food and affection. "Just you and me now, boy," Jake said, scratching behind Bear's ears. The garage door was open to the winter air, and Jake could see stars through the gap. The night was clear and cold, the kind of weather that made everything sharp and clean. He thought about Emma, probably sitting in her dingy apartment, regretting the choices that had brought her there. He thought about Trent, who'd left town the day after their confrontation and hadn't been seen since. Jake felt nothing for either of them. The anger that had driven him for months was gone, replaced by something colder but more sustainable. He'd learned that he was capable of things he'd never imagined: violence, calculation, ruthlessness. It should have frightened him. Instead, it felt like coming home. Around midnight, Jake heard a car pull into the driveway. Through the garage window, he saw a black SUV with tinted windows. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out, tall, blonde, wearing an expensive suit that somehow managed to look professional and dangerous at the same time. She walked to the garage entrance and paused at the threshold, studying Jake with calculating eyes. "Mr. Morrison?" "Depends who's asking." The woman smiled, and it didn't reach her eyes. "My name is Victoria Blake. I represent certain interests that have been watching your situation with great interest." Jake set down his beer and stood up slowly. "What kind of interests?" "The kind that appreciate problem-solving skills, the kind that value discretion and determination." Victoria stepped into the garage, her heels clicking on the concrete floor. "The kind that could use someone with your particular talents." "I don't know what you're talking about." Victoria pulled out a tablet and showed Jake a series of photographs. Him confronting Trent at the gym, the forensic accounting documents, surveillance photos of Emma's apartment. "We've been watching you handle your domestic situation with impressive efficiency," she said. "You identified the problem, gathered intelligence, developed a strategy, and executed it flawlessly, all while maintaining complete deniability." Jake's blood turned cold. "You've been spying on me?" "We've been evaluating you. There's a difference." Victoria put away the tablet. "We represent clients who occasionally require specialized services, people who need problems solved quietly and permanently, without leaving fingerprints or paper trails." "You're talking about criminal activity." Victoria's smile widened. "I'm talking about entrepreneurship, the kind that pays very, very well." She pulled a business card from her jacket and set it on Jake's workbench. It was plain white with only a phone number embossed in black. "When you're ready to discuss your future, call that number. But don't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." Victoria turned and walked back to her SUV, leaving Jake alone with the business card and 1,000 questions. He picked up the card, feeling its expensive weight. The number was local, but that didn't mean anything. People like Victoria Blake could be anywhere, be anyone. Jake thought about his empty house, his solitary life, the skills he'd discovered he possessed. He thought about the satisfaction he'd felt watching Emma and Trent face the consequences of their choices. Maybe Victoria Blake was right. Maybe he had found his calling. Jake slipped the business card into his wallet and turned back to the Charger. The car sat gleaming under the garage lights, beautiful and powerful and ready for whatever came next, just like him. 3 months later, Jake Morrison was a different man entirely. His garage had been converted into a sophisticated workshop filled with specialized tools and equipment that had nothing to do with automotive restoration. The Charger sat in the corner, still perfect, but now serving as both transportation and camouflage. To his neighbors, Jake was simply a divorced mechanic trying to start his own business. They didn't know about the untraceable bank accounts, the encrypted communications, or the clients who paid enormous sums for problems to disappear quietly. Victoria Blake had been right about his talents. Jake discovered he had a gift for seeing solutions that others missed, for finding pressure points that could bring down the most carefully constructed facades. He was methodical, patient, and utterly without mercy when it came to people who preyed on the innocent. His first job had been simple: a wealthy businessman who'd been embezzling from his company's pension fund. Jake had gathered evidence, leaked it to the right journalists, and watched the man's empire crumble in a matter of weeks. The pension fund was recovered, the workers got their money back, and Jake collected a six-figure fee from parties who preferred to remain anonymous. The second job had been more complex. A corrupt judge who'd been taking bribes to fix custody cases, leaving children with abusive parents while their protective relatives fought hopeless legal battles. Jake had infiltrated the judge's social circle, recorded damning conversations, and orchestrated a scandal that ended the man's career and sent him to prison. Each job taught Jake something new about the world's hidden systems, about the networks of corruption and cruelty that operated just beneath the surface of respectable society. He learned to move through that world like a ghost, gathering information, applying pressure, solving problems that the law couldn't or wouldn't address. Tonight's job was personal in a way that the others hadn't been. Jake sat in the Charger across the street from a familiar house, watching through binoculars as his target moved around inside. Trent Walker had returned to town 3 days ago, apparently believing that enough time had passed for people to forget what he'd done. He'd moved into a rental house on the east side, gotten a job at a different auto shop, and started trying to rebuild his life. But Trent had made a crucial mistake. He'd contacted Emma. Jake had been monitoring both of their communications as part of his ongoing security protocols, old habits from his new profession. Emma was living in Cleveland now, working as a waitress and struggling to make ends meet. She'd been desperate enough to respond when Trent reached out, talking about second chances and starting over. What Trent didn't know was that Emma had something he wanted very badly: information about Jake's new activities. Emma had noticed the changes in her ex-husband's lifestyle, the expensive equipment in his garage, the way money seemed to flow more freely than it had when they were married. She thought Jake was involved in something illegal, and she was right. She just didn't understand what. Trent planned to use that information to blackmail Jake, to force him to share whatever windfall he'd discovered. It was a stupid plan conceived by desperate people, but it was dangerous enough to require attention. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria Blake. Subject is alone. Surveillance confirms no unexpected visitors. Green light for containment. Jake typed back. Acknowledged. Beginning approach. He climbed out of the Charger and walked across the street, moving with the quiet confidence he'd developed over the past 3 months. Trent's rental house was a modest ranch with a small front yard and no security system. Perfect for what Jake had planned. Jake picked the front door lock in less than 30 seconds, a skill he'd acquired during his second month of specialized training. The house was dark except for the flickering glow of a television in the living room. Trent was asleep on the couch, an empty beer bottle on the coffee table beside him. He looked even worse than he had during their last encounter, thinner, graying at the temples, wearing clothes that had seen better days. Jake stood over his former friend for a moment, remembering the man Trent had been before greed and stupidity destroyed him. That man had been Jake's best friend, someone he'd trusted with his life. This man was just another problem to be solved. Jake touched Trent's shoulder gently. Wake up. Trent's eyes snapped open, confusion giving way to terror as he recognized Jake's face. Jesus Christ, how did you get in? Same way I've been getting into places for the past 3 months. Jake settled into an armchair across from the couch, making himself comfortable. We need to talk. Trent sat up slowly, his hand moving toward the end table where Jake knew he kept a pistol. I wouldn't, Jake said conversationally. The tool's not there anymore. Trent's face went white. What do you want? I want to understand why you thought blackmailing me was a good idea. Trent's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I don't know what you're talking about. Jake pulled out his phone and played a recording of Trent's conversation with Emma from 2 days ago. Trent's voice was clearly audible. Jake's into something big. Money, equipment, connections. If we play this right, we can make him pay for what he did to us. Sound familiar? Jake asked. Trent slumped back against the couch cushions. How long have you been watching me? Since you came back to town. Question is, what am I going to do about your little plan? Look, Jake, I was just talking. I wasn't really going to... You were going to try to blackmail me using information you got from my ex-wife. Jake's voice remained calm, conversational. Information that could get a lot of people eliminated if it fell into the wrong hands. Trent's confusion was genuine. Eliminated? What the hell are you talking about? Jake studied his former friend's face, reading the truth there. Trent really didn't understand what he'd stumbled into. Let me explain something to you. Jake said quietly. The man you knew, the mechanic who worked at Brennan's shop, who was married to Emma, who restored old cars in his garage, that man is gone. He died the night I heard you and Emma laughing about how pathetic he was. Trent opened his mouth to speak, but Jake held up a hand. The man sitting here now does different work for different people. People who don't like their business discussed by small-town failures looking for easy money. I don't understand. You don't need to understand. You just need to disappear, permanently this time. Jake pulled out an envelope and set it on the coffee table. $50,000 in cash. Enough to start over somewhere far away from here. Trent stared at the envelope like it was a snake. What's the catch? No catch, just conditions. Jake leaned forward slightly. You take the money and you leave. Tonight. You don't contact Emma again. You don't try to come back. You don't tell anyone about this conversation. And if I refuse? Jake's smile was terrible. Then we solve this problem a different way. Trent reached for the envelope with shaking hands. This is really happening. This is really happening. Trent opened the envelope and stared at the cash inside. More money than he'd seen in years. Why are you doing this? After everything I did to you? Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. Because the man you wronged was weak. He let people hurt him because he didn't know any better. The man I am now doesn't make those mistakes. So this is mercy? Jake turned back to face Trent. This is efficiency. You're not worth the trouble it would take to solve this problem permanently. Trent clutched the envelope to his chest. I'll leave tonight. You'll never see me again. I know. Jake walked to the front door, then paused. Trent, if you ever change your mind about staying away, remember what I said about solving problems permanently. Jake left Trent sitting on the couch with $50,000 and the certain knowledge that his old life was over forever. Outside, Jake climbed back into the Charger and drove slowly through the streets of his hometown. Everything looked the same as it had a year ago, but he saw it differently now. The houses, the businesses, the people, all of it was just surface, hiding the real currents of power and money that shaped the world. His phone buzzed with another text from Victoria Blake. Well? Problem solved, Jake typed back. Subject relocating voluntarily. Excellent. We have another situation that requires your attention. Can you be in Chicago tomorrow? Jake looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. The face that looked back was harder than it had been a year ago, marked by experiences that most people never imagined. Yes, he typed. Send me the details. Jake Morrison drove through the night toward his new life, leaving behind the ashes of his old one. The man who'd once dreamed of fixing cars and raising a family with Emma was gone forever. What remained was something else entirely, something useful to people who solve problems that couldn't be solved through legal channels. The Charger's engine rumbled contentedly as Jake merged onto the interstate, heading toward Chicago and whatever waited there. In the rearview mirror, his hometown disappeared into the darkness. He never looked back.